Bueno, la verdad que muchísimas gracias que nos hayan acompañado en esta otra actividad del Instituto Nacional de la Música. Siempre nosotros con cosas sencillas, ¿vieron? Realmente para nosotros es un orgullo increíble poder contar con uno de los técnicos, podemos llamarlo ingeniero, aunque él no se reconoce como ingeniero, sino como técnico, que ha cambiado la lógica en la cual se posicionaban los ingenieros y técnicos de sonido con respecto a las grabaciones. Creemos que hubo un antes y un después en el protagonismo, ¿no?, que se tuvo en una grabación con respecto a lo que más siempre interesa, que es la música. Nos presentamos los tres y arrancamos con esta actividad.
Soy Facu Rodríguez, represento a AATIA hoy y soy un fan más de Geoff, al igual que todos ustedes.
I'm Geoff Emerick, who recorded the Beatles records and albums. And I guess we're here today, to discuss the way we did that and artistically did it, rather than possibly away from the way the method of today is used to make music.
Yeah,
I mean, we're here to talk about making music and real music, and how we approach that, rather than just pressing a button to get a sound, but we're listening to real instruments. And this is the way I was brought up, and we create our own picture of music and sound, and remixing and make a picture of beautiful mixes.
La obra de Geoff también abarca a Beck, ¿no?, a Elvis Costello, ¿no?, a Bad Fingers, otros grupos que realmente hicieron un aporte muy fuerte a la evolución de la música. Cuando Geoff hablaba de esto de pulsar botones, realmente aquellos que pudimos leer el libro, El sonido de los Beatles, nos dimos cuenta del cambio profundo que hubo en cuanto a visualizar a alguien que tenía aparentemente una función técnica y convertirla en una función creativa. Como desde un espacio que estaba asignado a solo el aspecto técnico, se logró hacer un aporte muy fuerte a lo que es la creación, combinando lo que era la música con los colores que se podían aportar desde las distintas frecuencias y eso. La actividad la arrancamos escuchando una canción y después Geoff nos va a decir más o menos cómo fue que se grabó. Cuando se hicieron las mezclas, las que participaba Geoff y participaban los Beatles eran en mono, y que después el estéreo por ahí la hacía otra gente. Por eso lo que vamos a escuchar ahora es, como bien decía Facundo, en mono. En mono. Vamos con Tomorrow Never Knows.
Lay down all thoughts, surrender to the boy.
So I suggest that I start talking about the creation of this track. I'm going back in time. I was 19 years old. The original Beatles engineer, Norman Smith, had left to become a producer. I worked as an assistant engineer on Beatles sessions. So I was a familiar face. I worked on She Loves You and Help and many of their single sessions. So I was just a familiar face. And there came a point within the EMI situation, which was a corporation, that being the Beatles coming in as a pretty good young band wanted to go further forward, not working with old people, but younger people. So Norman had left, and I was promoted at a very young age as to be a recording engineer, because when I started at EMI, I was like 15 years old, and I went up the ladder, and I was a mastering engineer. I was now at the point of being 19 years old, when obviously discussions behind the scenes happened, and they said, no, we want a younger kid to work on our music. So this sort of happened, and then Norman had left, and the first thing I recorded as Norman's replacement was Pretty Flamingo by Manfred Mann. So 5 minutes later, because I was taking over Norman's artists, and most of those artists were produced by George Martin, and George Martin and I had sort of a good rapport, and we had a good sense of humour together, which was great in this business. And so anyway, 5 months after I'd started, I was called to the manager's office, and the manager said, and I went to the manager's office at Abbey Road as it became, and he said, and George Martin was there, and George said to me, well, do you want to record the Beatles? And my heart sank, obviously, although the Beatles weren't as big as they are now at that time, but pretty big. It was like the top man in England. So, I'm thinking, well, I'm playing a little mind game. There's a little bouncy ball backwards and forwards from yes to no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. It kept going to no, and then eventually it landed on yes, right? It landed on yes. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose here. And so anyway, on the first day, which was 2 weeks after that thing when George said, do you want to, engineer the Beatles? So it was 2 weeks later, we started what was to become the Revolver album. So when that first of all started, I had one of the microphones open from the studio, and Philip MacDonald, who was my assistant, was with me. And I know McCartney knew what had been discussed, obviously behind the scenes. I wasn't privy to what was discussed. And there was a sort of wink and a smile between McCartney and George Martin. But George Harrison said to George Martin, where's Norman? So me hearing that, my heart really sank, because obviously some of the band didn't know that I was taking over as their engineer, although I was a familiar face and a friend of theirs. So we started the session, and they didn't want this protocoled sound that came from EMI Studios, which they refer to as wishy-washy. And without being disrespectful, it was the Cliff Richard drum sound, the normal sound that came out of a directive from a corporation as this is the way you record. So they wanted new sounds. And luckily I'd been a mastering engineer at a very early age and was remastering American records for the European market, and I was quite aware of new sounds on those records that weren't coming out of EMI Studios, especially on the bass sounds and the drum sounds. So I think it started with Ringo, because Ringo said, we're hearing more presence on the drums on these American records. And I said, yeah, I know. So I'm under pressure here. This is the first day of making their records. So what I decided to do was to start lowering the drum mics, because the normal thing was the drum mics here, but I pulled them down here. There weren't many of them, but especially on the bass drum. And because I knew there was a really hard sound on bass drums on American records. And I call it protocol, but the directive for EMI Studios was that you record a bass drum with the microphone 18 inches away from the bass drum, and that's the way you record it. And I think it was a D20 microphone. So what I did, I decided, how do I make a really heavy, hard thump? So I decided to take the front skin off the bass drum. And at that time, we took the front skin off, stuffed it with that four-necked sweater that I think was used on the Help film, put that into the drum, put the front skin back on, and I moved the bass drum mic, I don't know, 6 inches away from the skin at the bottom thing, which gave this really heavy thump. So then, you know, I'm looking for new sounds. So I knew that when I'd done Pretty Flamingo with Manfred Mann, I'd put a dobro guitar through a Fairchild 660, which gave it a lot of presence. And we're working now on 4 tracks, so I thought, well, I'm going to put the whole drum kit through the Fairchild 660 and overload it. So this was now their drum sound, which I still believe is the drum sound everyone wants to achieve today. Then it came to Lennon wanting his vocal sound.
So I'm sorry. On one track, right?
On one track, yeah, on one track. Yes. So it's all mono drums. And it was very hard for John to explain himself. He could only explain himself in sort of surreal terms. And on Tomorrow Never Knows, he wanted the drum sound, or not the vocal sound, what he, in his mind was the Dalai Lama singing on a mountaintop 25 miles away from the studio. So I'm like a 19-year-old kid who's got nothing, right, except some string and sticky tape. So I'm thinking, my God, you know, what do I do? I mean, I'm feeling nauseous now, right? I'm going to vomit, right? So luckily for me, looking through that control room window was the revolving speaker from the Hammond organ. So I thought, well, if we can just cut into the circuitry of that and put John's voice into it, it will give him, well, obviously we didn't know what it was going to sound like, but it sounded really fantastic. And in the end on the end record, we used it for that effect for the last verse. In the meantime, you know, it was discussions with McCartney over bass sounds, you know, and yeah, we want more presence, we want this, we want that. So eventually, and also, of course, on Tomorrow Never Knows, it was the first time we'd made a drum loop, because Ringo couldn't, you know, hold that tempo constantly, you know, on the beat for 2 minutes, 3 minutes. No one could. So that was the first time we'd ever made a loop of drums. So that became, you know, the drum track. And then there was gaps in the songs. And Paul used to go home and make what he was experimenting with, which was tape loops. And what used to happen with, I don't know how many people know about the tape loops, but you make a loop of oxide tape, and we all had our reel-to-reel tape recorders, all of us, and we did what we did with them. But if you disconnect the erase head on the tape recorder, and the tape loop goes through, and you keep recording different sounds over and every time it goes through, the pre-recorded sound that was recorded only diminishes by 3 dBs because there's no erase head, but the bias current diminishes it. So as you keep building up these layers of sounds, you get a tape loop. That's why you've got like seagull sounds and all manner of sounds, wine glasses, anything. So Paul came in about 2 days later with a plastic bag with these tape loops on. And in number 3 control room at EMI Studios, there were 2 stereo tape machines, but we needed more tape machines. So luckily on that particular day, there were not a lot of sessions in Abbey Road Studios. So what we did, we commandeered the maintenance engineers to go into the other studios on the control rooms and to hold these tape loops that Paul had created on drumstick. And we fed with tie lines back into our control room the tape loops that were coming from these other 3 studios. So we ended up with like 8 tape loops, which we could play on faders. So that all came into our control room. The problem being, with a tape loop and a drumstick, sometimes the tape loop went up, up the drumstick and it came off the tape machine. And these are maintenance engineers who weren't really, into what we were doing because they thought we were nuts, right? So anyway, if their tape loop came off the drumstick, they had to phone up on the telephone and saying, I've lost my tape loop. So eventually, we got all the tape loops running and we ended up with what's on that record because we're on 4-track. We can't do another take. If you want to do another take, you've got to wipe the take you've just done. And it was on one insert into where it's supposed to be on the record. So in this instance, it's like the first synthesizer, probably the first drum loop. I guess the Leslie speaker sound developed into a chorus pedal. I just don't know. So whatever we did that day, although in those 4 days of work, changed, as far as I know now, the whole way that we record.
Definitely.
I can't. I'm trying to condense this,
Yeah,
but I felt like death.
Okay, Brilliant.
That's the easiest way I can explain it, you know. But I have to say, I mean, I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. I've got nothing to help me. I've got 2 stereo tape machines, an 8-input mixing console and an echo chamber. No selectable equalization on that mixing console, which was the Red 51. It was just treble and bass. And I'm just desperate. All I could do to try and create something different was to just abuse the equipment. Because what happened then, the older engineers said, "Oh, you want to see what Geoff did last night? Oh, you can't do that, right?" No, and it was a horrible position to be in. I'm 19 years old. These are guys 40 years old. We've done it this way for so long. Why is he changing this process? We just go in and do our session. We don't want this guy coming in changing all these sounds. So I was in a really bad position at that time.
Fortunately, you didn't love your job that day.
Well, nearly.
Ese tema fue elegido por AATIA. Ahora vamos por un tema que fue elegido por los músicos, Penny Lane.
In Penny Lane there is a barber showing photographs of every head he's had the pleasure to know, and all the people that come and go stop and say hello. On the corner is a banker with a motor car, the little children laugh at him behind his back, and the banker never wears a Mac in the pouring rain. Very strange. Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. There beneath the blue suburban skies I sit, and meanwhile back in Penny Lane there is a fireman with an hourglass, and in his pocket is a portrait of the Queen. He likes to keep his fire engine clean. It's a clean machine. Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. For a fish and finger pies in summer. Meanwhile, back behind the shelter in the middle of the roundabout, the pretty nurse is selling poppies from a tray, and though she feels as if she's in a play, she is anyway. In Penny Lane, the barber shaves another customer. We see the banker sitting waiting for a trim, and then the fireman rushes in from the pouring rain. Very strange. Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. There beneath the blue suburban skies I sit, and meanwhile back Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. There beneath the blue suburban skies, Penny Lane.
Geoff, ¿cómo se grabó esto?
How did you record this, Geoff?
Digo,
The process on this recording was the fact that, again, because Paul has been listening to American records and the cleanliness of them and the in-depth tightness of them, without any sort of, let's think, depth of field involved. It was all very tight and sparse. So Paul wanted to, it started, as far as I remember, because Paul's got a tremendous sense of timing. So I don't know whether we went 4-track to 4-track to 4-track, I'm not sure. But on the first basic rhythm track, some of it's got lost.
but it's like 4 or 5 keyboards. I think we possibly did 4 keyboards because, you know, it's like the out-of-tune piano, the grand piano, the attack piano, and he's doing that rhythm all the way through. And I think we bounced those 4 tracks to possibly maybe 1 or 2 tracks, probably 1 track of the next 4 track, and overdubbed a few more piano tracks in time with that. But because of we didn't use click tracks. So because of that sense of timing, that's how that track started. And I'm listening to it just now for the first time. I know obviously there's little drum overdubs, because when we worked on these tracks, they were structured and built up from the studio floor. They didn't come in with a demo. There was an idea of a song or maybe a lyric, but all musically, these were built up in the confines of the studio. And I know because the way Paul's mind was now starting to work differently from the earlier Beatle records, there's a little drum roll that I just heard Ringo do, which is an overdub. But the thought process behind that was enormous. I mean, this is the first time I've just realised that by hearing this track again. Paul was like the musician's musician, and because he at this point was his partner was Jane Asher at that time, and Jane came from a classical musical background. And I know that Paul was now learning, you know, classical sort of involvement with structure. So anyway, that's how that sort of track started, and he just wanted this cleanliness and this tightness on that rhythm. As I said, some of those keyboard sounds have gotten lost as we went 4-track to 4-track. But what also happened with the penny, you know, the Bach trumpet, because both he and I, without realising it when we were really, really young, because I fell in love with music when I was young, we used to listen to the Brandenburg concertos. So Paul was like 8 years old, I was 7 years old, but we played the Brandenburg concertos, and as young kids loved it for whatever reason, but we did. So he had the idea for the little Bach trumpet. And when David Mason came in to do the Bach trumpet, they worked the sort of tonality and the notes out of the piano, and which took quite a while to do, because Paul's saying, well, why can't you do this and do that? And but can you do this and do that? And David's going, no, I can't do that, right? So, but it ended up with that very, very, very last high note. And anyway, we eventually cut that track of the piccolo trumpet. And once we'd done it, it was like the take, because if you wanted to do another take, you had to wipe that take, because we're on 4-track. And then Paul said, because I know it's accepted now to be able to play that high note on that trumpet. And Paul said, can you do one more? And David said, no way. And no one had really said that to Paul, because he was quite adamant sometimes with the thought process. I mean, but we could have destroyed, I mean, it was perfect, but he wanted one more take, as I said, which would have meant we lost that take, which David said, I'm not doing that anymore, you know. So that's, I mean, that Penny Lane track is just, again, for me, listening to it like this today, I hear things in there, because when we worked, we structured our basic rhythm tracks, and when we mixed them to 2 tracks of the next second 4-track, we'd made decisions, and we'd EQ the instruments and the reverbs or anything, and we made a decision. This was the basic rhythm track. The only thing you used it for when you mixed it was level. You didn't put more EQ on it, you didn't do anything. And because of that, we made a decision. We loved that basic rhythm track. Then we do the overdubs. There's nothing superfluous when you really analyse any of these Beatles songs. There's nothing superfluous. There's no overdub on those records that doesn't mean anything. It was all sort of planned out. We didn't just say, well, overdub this, overdub over that. You know, it's just, that's the way we structured the recording process on all those records. And when you really analyse them, there's really nothing on them when you say, well, there's a little drum roll, there's a little this, a little that. But every little overdub after the basic rhythm track meant something. So anyway, that's sort of the story of Penny Lane, but also the story of many of the other tracks. You know?
Amazing.
Okay.
Amazing.
Extraordinario, ¿eh? Qué lujo, ¿no? Y ahora para terminar esta primera parte, una canción que fue, creo que bastante sencilla, ¿no, Geoff? Bastante sencilla fue. que Lennon en algún momento creo que te dijo algo como mezclemos estas dos versiones, que debe ser muy fácil seguro. Por ahí te acordás. Vamos a escuchar ahora Strawberry Fields, y acá Geoff nos va a contar un poquitito cómo resolvió ese problema que le habían planteado, ¿no? John, con esa claridad que tenía.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever. Living is easy with eyes closed. Misunderstanding all you see. It's getting hard to be someone, but it all works out. It doesn't matter much to me. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever. No one I think is in my tree. I mean, it must be high or low. That is, you can't, tune in, but it's alright. That is, I think it's not too bad. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever. Always know, sometimes think it's me, but I know when it's a dream. I think I know, yes, but it's all wrong. That is, I think I disagree. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever. Strawberry fields forever. Strawberry fields forever.
So we're going to talk about the creation of that track.
Well, it started with the recording of what was to be the first version. We'd recorded it in its sort of, I guess, lighter rhythms and the attitude from John singing the song. John came in, we did a mix, and John came in about 2 weeks later and said, I want to re-record it. I want to make it heavier. Which was the end part of what we hear on Strawberry Fields. I want an orchestra on it. I want it to be really heavy. Again, because John couldn't express himself musically per se, he heard something in his head. We don't really know what that was, but whatever the arrangement musically ended up being, he liked. So we recorded the second version, which was the heavier version, about 2 weeks later. First of all, he came in and said, I like that mix, but I want to re-record it. So we did. And then we re-recorded that heavier version. And then he came in about, I don't know, another week later. I can't quite remember the time period on this, but he said, I really like the first part of the first version, and I like the rest of the second version. So can we just chop them together? The problem being the first version was in a different tempo and a different key. I think they were a semitone apart. So in their vocabulary, being the Beatles, no or can't was not a word that you ever used, because if you said, no, I can't, they'd say, well, why? So you can't answer that. So anyway, we put our heads together. We got two mixes of two different versions. And sometimes I get this the wrong way around. So what we did, we had a two playback machines, both on vari speed. And we had a third machine, which was the new record machine. And we actually, to marry up with the second version, we had to speed up the first version. I don't think I slowed it down. So over that first minute of the first version, to marry in with the second version on vari speed, slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly, gradually sped it up so you don't detect it because it's marrying up to the key of the second version. I may have slowed it down, but I'm saying we sped it up. And we knew where our edit point was going to be, which is on the word going, about a minute in. Let me take you down because I'm going, and it's on the word going. So that's our edit point. But on the second tape machine, which had been done in the other tempo and other key, we had to we set the speed to marry up with the first one, but I think we had to slow it down or to match them or to marry up with the tonality of John's voice. So we found our edit point, which was on the word going, and we copied that section. But basically, of course, the last section is a complete copy of the first remix of the second version. So I couldn't do it. We used scissors at EMI. They didn't use razor blades or editing blocks. And the reason for that was because of all the classical music that had to be edited, sometimes you had to do a variation on the angle of the cut to either edit the violas or the first violins because of the way the stereo, classical music ran on the 15 inches per second tape. So you had scissors and you could vary the cut to accommodate where you wanted the cut, especially with so many cuts on classical music. So I had scissors, but I couldn't just do a 45-degree cut. I sort of had a little template, and it was like a very, very, very long cut, and it was really reacting like a crossfade. And we did our little splice, so I'm snipping the tape like this, thinking, my God. And anyway, we stuck it together, and I stood in front of the tape machine to avoid anyone seeing the tape go across the heads. John came up and listened to it, and of course, I know where it is, but you can't really detect where the edit is, and it sounds just perfect. But it's a minute in on the word going. Also, of course, on Tomorrow Never Knows, was on Strawberry Fields was the first time the mellotron came into being. Often people would bring new instruments into our sessions, and Paul was sort of playing around with it. So for quite a while, and that's where that whole mood of the song started. And again, because of all the structure of these records was constructed in the confines of the studio, it's like a John song, but you've got like the romantic melodic sound of Paul playing the mellotron. And this often happens on a lot of the Beatles songs because, John was, I'm not going to say the aggressor, for want of a better word, but Paul was the romantic. And it was the combination of those two people that created a lot of those arrangements in those songs. So that mellotron melodic line going through that against John's angry aggression works so well. And also we were just talking about the way the drum parts work with impeccable, not accuracy, but tonality with that mellotron. Me listening to these again, today under these circumstances, I can hear things in there that I don't even remember, and it sounds just amazing. I can't believe it sometimes.
It probably would be interesting if, I'm thinking you were really clear that we listened to the mixes in mono.
Yeah, well, of course.
The stereo was, you had only 4 tracks, right?
What happened with this, there's a premise on everything we recorded up to the days of Sgt. Pepper was recorded through one loudspeaker in mono. And it was, that was our process. It wasn't that easy, especially when it came to the question of like John's electric guitar against George Harrison's electric guitar coming out of one loudspeaker. So I had the luxury of time because they were working out and routining the song in the studio. And I've got to get clarity and definition on those 2 guitars, so the tonality of each guitar doesn't cloud the other guitar. And I'm very limited on my equalization. So sometimes to help, I would go down and adjust the amplifiers. And if that didn't work, I would ask them to change guitars. A lot of people say to me, well, what guitar did George play on that track or that track? I don't know, because I was just listening. And I'd just say to George or John, can you change the guitar? Can you make it a brighter guitar or a duller guitar? That's all I was after, painting these pictures of tonalities. And that's what it was about. It wasn't about technology. It was nothing to do with that. Because I used to go into the studio when I started to rehearse one of the tracks, and I used to like the combination of 2 instruments, the tonality of them blending together, possibly. But that became my dominant tonality of the record. So when we started to EQ or add the instruments to the rest of the mix, the equalization and tonality of those instruments complemented the original tonality of what I call the dominant. So it was purely an artistic, approach. There was nothing to do with technology. We weren't even allowed to even move a jack plug, from one jack to. We had to phone up the maintenance people and say, even with an orchestra in the studio. If I wanted to alter a microphone from one fader to the other, we had to phone them up and say, can we move a microphone from this fader? And you'd hear them run down the stairs. And oh, seriously, you've got the orchestra down there, right? And you think, oh my God, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, the orchestra there, it's money. So they come into the control room and we say, we want that fader 6 on fader 7. They just go, I couldn't do that. I wasn't allowed to do that. But we started to break down barriers, because of what we wanted. Anyway, so that was really what sort of happened on that. It's a hard way. All I'm saying is I'm coming from an artistic angle here when we're mixing music and painting a picture with music and tonalities. A lot of people now, because of the Pro Tools situation, which is fantastic for film work. You can't do films without Pro Tools. But we're mixing tonalities for real music, Stradivarius violins and so forth. I still try to mix, to analog if I can. I know I have to insert work into recording, onto Pro Tools. But really it's a recording medium. As we know, there's so many people now just don't even listen. They just look at a screen all day long. I don't understand that, but that's the way the kids are taught today, and it's so wrong, in my opinion. You're recording music. Go and listen to an orchestra. Listen to a recording. Just pull out the bassoon line, the clarinet line, the viola line. Just listen to that. Obliterate all the rest of it. You're recording music. So that's the way I work. It's the way I was brought up, Yeah. But it's also, it's great because I just mentioned that you're painting by numbers, but it's like if you put it into the visual perspective, it's like, wouldn't it be great, which I try and teach a lot of students, not teach them, but explain to them, just put your individual brushstrokes on something. There's one instance when the easiest way I explain this sometimes, I was doing a big advert in London, and we had a symphony orchestra in number 1 Abbey Road. And I knew it was going to go into the cinemas, this advert, and it was going to be in surround sound, and I wanted to do something different. And I thought, well, I'm going to try something here. Once I'd mic'd the orchestra up, I dispersed metal trash cans of different sizes within the expanse of the orchestra in different places, and just dangled a mic in those trash cans. And we did what we did. I didn't listen to them, but when it came to doing the surround sound mix, and I took out all the real microphones, you could actually play a tune with the tonalities of that mixed orchestra in the trash cans. But I'm trying to explain to students, experiment like that. I know sometimes it's impossible, but you should put your individual brushstrokes on recording the music, like Picasso or Rembrandt or whatever, which to me was fun, and it can be done. You don't just keep pressing a button on a plug-in, Yeah. Well, I mean, if the guitar sound or the instrument's not sounding right for whatever you're doing, don't put a plug-in in to make it change. Change the guitar or change the drums, change anything, and build the track up from that.
Qué interesante, ¿no? Digo, que Geoff pueda contarle, cuento a Geoff, que acá hay muchos de los técnicos e ingenieros más importantes de la Argentina. Digo, lo que vos estás contando con tu experiencia es muy importante como transmisión, ¿no? de justamente esta experiencia.
Well, I mean, I think I basically sort of said that in the last explanation of the way I work. I mean, I'm coming from a different, not era, but a different angle to try and promote the way we record music. And as I said, it's nothing wrong with the Pro Tools situation. You have to use the Pro Tools situation on doing a lot of the visuals, a lot of the film work, because you can't do the film without it. But when it comes to, I don't know, if you've got the inkling to know what, I know, because I tell you what happened when we went from analog to digital. I remember when I was working as a kid as an assistant engineer on the classical side, and one of the, I think I've forgotten the guy's name now, he had a Stradivarius violin, and you listen to it in the studio and it sounded fine. We're using tube equipment. You go into the control room and it sounds pretty good. It sounds almost like the Stradivarius that you're listening to in the studio. And then the digital situation happened, and the difference between listening to that violin in the studio and coming into the control room now was just completely different. But not being that technical, I do know that it was down to harmonics that were not happening or happening between the digital process. And why would you pay $2 million or $3 million for a Stradivarius violin and record it in the digital realm? I mean, I know we've got high resolution now, but it's still, if you were to listen to it from here to here, it doesn't sound the same. You've lost the depth, the tonality of the instrument, and that's what you're supposed to be doing if you're recording music. You can't lose that magic of all those wonderful instruments. But do we lose it? Maybe we do. I don't know. So that's all I'm really saying, which is reiterating, what I said on the last discussion. Which is we're recording music, and you've got to listen to what you're supposed to be recording. I don't know how many people agree with that, but I'm sure I'm right in saying that. I'm right in saying that.
Yes, definitely, you're right. You have to.
It depends where. But it depends where you come from. I mean,
yeah.
If you're doing rap, I don't know, which I don't. I mean, because I hate it. But okay, we're talking about that situation now. I mean, I can only work with real artists with talent. And the only way as a producer or recording engineer you can develop their artistic value. You don't say, well, I'm the record producer, I'm going to play piano on your record. No, that's not what you're there for. you try and draw more out of the artist, that they get inhibited. And they might say, well, I'm not going to do that because people will laugh at that. But you try and draw more out of an artist. Because it was even like that because I worked with Art Garfunkel and also Elvis Costello. And when I was working with Elvis, I used to love his lyrics, but his voice to me was never forward enough. So when we started Imperial Bedroom, on the monitor mixes, I had his voice way up there. And he couldn't handle it for 2 weeks. He was like breaking out in sweats, and he was like, oh my God. But what happened in the end, I was putting which I normally do with an artist like that, I was putting his voice through a Fairchild 660, which I always use on Beatles records, McCartney, Lennon, whatever. And I saw him about 3 years ago because he did a jazz concert in New Orleans. And someone said, the moderator at that panel, said, oh, I'm an Elvis Costello fan. And he said, well, I'm going to play some Imperial Bedroom. I hadn't heard Imperial Bedroom for many, 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 many years. Elvis was performing during that jazz week. And he played it, and I realized what had happened when I put that Fairchild limiter on Elvis's voice, because it was so up front in his ears, and when he got softer at the ends of the words, the limiter was returning and lifting the volume up. And I realized by listening to the ends of the words that he was sculpturing the mouth noises and the lip movements and everything. And I spoke to him. I said, Elvis, we were listening to Imperial Bedroom the other day. And I said, I realized on the ends of the words, you actually crafted the way the lip movements and the mouth movements ended on the ends of the words. And he said, you're quite right. So again, that was like now putting one level up because of what we've done to try and pull more out of the artist. So things like that happen. So that's the job,
Some of the questions you already answered, but let's try to clean up a bit. Perdón, muchas preguntas ya respondió, but it'd be nice to know how on earth did you get that amazing bass sound on Revolver? ¿Cómo lograste ese sonido de bajo en Revolver?
I've got this in Spanish.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Spanish, nice. So I can... How on earth did you get that amazing sound on Revolver?
In general, on the Revolver album, who was this directed to?
Geoff Emerick.
No, but I know who wrote it.
This is...
Anyway.
Yeah.
On the Revolver album, as you know, I was dropped in at the deep end here. I accepted the challenge, and on that very first day of recording, as we know on Tomorrow Never Knows, it went well, except I felt once we'd left the session, we'd won the session as myself and Philip, my second engineer, right? We went home quite elated that night at like 4 a.m. So, the next session was easier. That they knew I was now their engineer and could do this and do that. We did some wonderful things. One of the other things, again, with getting back to McCartney's bass, we were always looking for new sounds, was the question of the bass sounds. Because I'd been mastering American records, I knew the bass content on American records was a lot bigger than what EMI were putting on their records. So one of my theories, being so naive, was the fact if a bass speaker can push the bass out, then maybe another speaker could take the bass back in. So on 2 tracks, which was Rain, Paperback Writer, I actually used the speaker as the microphone, as an experiment, which wasn't that easy to control because I think I double compressed it to hold it. But I had to do things like that. But of course today it's like a standard process. I mean, Yamaha make this speaker which everyone puts in front of the bass drum and sometimes the bass amp. But so that's carried on there for 50 years almost, when we just did it ourselves. So all along the Revolver process, there were certain sounds that people had never heard before. I mean, I was in a state of whatever you want to call it. I mean, I was desperate sometimes, but it seemed to work out. But not yes, well, it worked out. But no one realised the pressures and not the nastiness, but the mental, not destruction, but the mental things I was going through to try and think of how can we do this, how can we do that. There was like brass things, and I decided, well, you know, we want a new brass sound. We don't want to put the microphone here on a sax section. You know, I'm going to put the mic right down in the bell. We've got 4 mics or 5 mics on 5 saxes right down in the bell and put them into a Fairchild 660 and overload it. So that was now the new brass sound, you know. It wasn't the normal 5 saxes with a mic up here. So I was just trying to do, you know, anything I could to change sounds, I guess.
Bueno, mi nombre es Amílcar Gilabert.
Sorry.
Después de dedicar toda una vida, tantos años, a los micrófonos, a los músicos fundamentalmente, a los productores, me imagino que una vez se enojó y tuvo que tener algún desahogo con ellos. Pero después de tantos años de trabajar buscando esas profundidades, buscando el alma sonora de cada músico con su instrumento, ¿qué me cuenta del MP3?
First of all, I mean, because of the way I've been brought up, and everyone sort of says to me, oh, you know, MP3s, and we've got all this higher, you know, resolution things going on. There's something that's going to happen, and we've got all different versions of high resolution, right? So this is still, as far as I'm concerned, I can't listen to an MP3. I still listen to CDs. I have to, right? So there's something going on as regard the manufacturing of high resolution that might happen towards another year, whereby all these different versions of high resolution are coming into being. But there's but between all the, I'm going to say, as a metaphor, the record companies or the manufacturers of all the higher end of this stuff. I'm going to do a video on this. I think I'm going to be the first one. But it's to explain what real music sounds like and the comparison of what an MP3 mix might sound like or the sound of the instruments compared with something else. The idea being to bring all the higher resolution systems in a way to bring them together so there's like a standard, and to actually criticize MP3s against high resolution, because everyone's failed as far as I know, but as I said, I still, you know, use those. But everyone's sort of failed because there's so many different systems of high resolution. So it's probably going to be, I don't know, a year or 18 months thing. But there's a company that's involved with other audio industry people to let's try and nail this. Whether it'll happen or not, I don't know. So I'm going to, I believe, doing the first video for this. And there's going to be other engineers that are going to do their, you know, instructional sort of video to get people to listen to real sound against MP3 sound. I know a lot of engineers say, oh, you can't hear the difference. But when you've been brought up listening to what we listen to, there is a difference. No, really. But it's making them aware of that. So hopefully something might come out of this, you know. Yeah.
Please tell us about the DI guitar setting on Revolution.
You know the true story, do you? Do you know the story, right? No. Because of Revolution, which was the White Album, right? I walked out after recording 11 tracks on the White Album because the vibes on the sessions was so bad. There was a lot of anger in the sessions, and John could be quite rude at times, but especially to me. A lot of the anger was between them, the 4 of them. So anyway, it was just before it was about a week before I left. I walked out on the White Album and I said, I can't take this anymore, right? So John's made a nasty remark to me on this particular night, and I'm not going to tell you what the remark was, and I just about had enough of his nasty remarks. Because sometimes when people make remarks like that, although they're possibly not meant, you feel them and you're hurt. So he said, I want this guitar sound. It wasn't a DI sound. So what I did on that distorted guitar sound, I thought, right, John, I'm going to give something to you that you've never, ever heard or expected in your life. So we're on the tube equipment on the Red 51 desk, I've got a Tube 47 mic on the amp, which I always used to use, and I put it into the amp on the first fader of the desk, and something we weren't allowed to touch was the input to the mic amp, because that was set by the maintenance people. So I overloaded that, and I took the output of that and put it into another mic amp and overloaded that, and took out the output of that and went into another mic amp and overloaded that, right? And I just went, is that what you want, right? But that sound was created out of my anger. It wasn't a question, I'm going to do this and do that. It was my anger that created that. I thought I'm not going to give any expletives here, but I mean that sound is out of anger. It's not a DI, because I very rarely use DIs.
And it's a classic now.
Well, I know. I mean, but it's a good example. I mean, you know, I was so angry that night. Really, I mean, I'm not going to even say what he said to me, you know.
Great.
Okay, pleasure.
Thanks, Geoff.
Y vamos a una pregunta de ti, a una de INAMU, y vamos cerrando. Antes que nada, quiero agradecer fuertemente a la Biblioteca Nacional por habernos facilitado este lugar, al personal técnico de la Biblioteca Nacional, a AATIA, la Asociación Argentina de Técnicos e Ingenieros de Audio, a Martín Kano, a la productora y al manager de Geoff en Estados Unidos, y sobre todo también a Geoff, ¿no?
Muchos de los que estamos hoy presentes somos técnicos e ingenieros y amamos esta profesión, y hace algunos años nos venimos juntando y nació AATIA, ¿sí? Lo ves ahí en el banner, es la Asociación Argentina de Técnicos e Ingenieros de Audio. El objetivo de estos encuentros es hacer más visible nuestra tarea. Y bueno, básicamente hay profesionales de todas las generaciones y compartimos muchas experiencias, y la idea es poner en común perspectivas respecto al lugar de la industria actual. Uno de los objetivos de Última, por ejemplo, ya es futurista esto, es, de alguna manera, aspirar inclusive al reconocimiento de derechos por la reproducción fonomecánica. Something like PRS o something like that. ¿Oíste hablar de algo así en el mundo? ¿Alguna otra asociación que lo haga? ¿Qué opinás? ¿Te parece? ¿Qué te parece?
Well, I mean, obviously, I mean, NARAS are trying to work with the government to try, if we're talking about mechanical rights and so forth, I mean, there's different rights, if that's what we're talking about. I mean, in England, whereby now, I believe, and you have to put in for it, if you're an engineer that works on an album, but you have to prove that you were on it, I mean, you can actually start getting royalties on a lot of that back catalogue going way back. If you actually can prove that you tapped a tambourine on a record, you can get royalties. So in England, I know it's a little bit further forward than probably what America is, because I know NARAS, I mean, go to the government and lobby for better rights for either writers, and it's always the writers and on the musical side rather than us as engineers or producers that actually deserve more because of what we actually did for the record. But I know NARAS are trying to do the best, but I believe the way the lobby situation works there is because one man maybe is trying to fight to help us, because there was a meeting at one of the AES conventions And one of the political people came down, and it was discussed with them. But it was really, as far as I was concerned, a waste of time, because, you know, in 6 months' time, that man is not in that political position, so it sort of falls flat. But I know people are trying to get us more money, because basically we did it for the love of the music. But now, because, you know, it's what it is, we deserve more financially, I mean, than we get. But I know people are trying, but it's just a hard fight in a sense. But I know things in England are a lot better than America. I know that, because, as I said, I believe engineers now, if they can prove they engineered a record going way back now, and I think this is just going to be passed, they can actually claim now a small royalty on the records they actually engineered, which would be beneficial to me too.
Yeah. Thank you very much. ¿Querés traer los obsequios de AATIA para Geoff? We have a little present for you. And for...
Oh, of course. Yes, thank you. That's awesome. No, thank you.
Muchas gracias. ¿Eh?
Yes.
Y bueno, en sintonía un poco con lo que se preguntaba, en esto de lo que siempre proponemos también desde el Instituto de la Música, el de juntarnos justamente para profundizar y mejorar las condiciones en las cuales se desarrolla cada actividad. Yo le quería preguntar a Geoff justamente sobre este disco, donde está el nombre de Geoff Emerick. Creo que es el primer disco, ¿no? ¿Esto fue consensuado o fue un derecho ganado por un técnico? Porque hasta ese momento no aparecían los nombres de los técnicos.
No, I know. I mean, no. The problem was, this was the system at EMI, and I believe, going back to Sgt. Pepper, I don't know how true it was, George Martin tried to get me a credit for Sgt. Pepper, and the organisation, being the corporate organisation, said, no, you can't have a credit for the recording engineer. I mean, the photographer that took the front cover on Pepper could have one, but I couldn't, and I recorded it. But then... Anyway, George Martin said he told me he tried to get me a credit, and they said, no, we don't do that, which is ridiculous in this day and age when you think about it, with the effort, especially on every record that people make and put so much effort into it. And especially now, why can the photographer who took the front picture of the cover get the credit? But what happened on this album, it's really a very funny credit, because it reads as, it doesn't say produced by George Martin, it just says thanks to George Martin, Geoff Emerick and Philip MacDonald, who was my assistant, and that's all it says. So that's except what happened, we're going on to something else. What happened when the CDs came out? There was a guy called, the guy who was president of Capitol, and I knew him, and I said to him, look, can you undo an injustice? I said, now that the CDs are coming out, do you think you could at least give me a credit on the CDs? Which he did. His name was Bhaskar Menon, and he was a really, really nice man, and he was the president of Capitol Records at the time. And it was Bhaskar that actually got my name put onto the CDs. But when this is what we're up against, this ridiculous situation where, who should get credits? I'll give credits to anybody. It's like the film business there, but even getting into the film business, I mean, the most amazing recordings of film soundtracks musically, first of all, you don't even get an Oscar for it, which you should do. I mean, the music recorder gets no Oscars. It's the guy that actually dubs that beautiful music recording to the picture that gets the Oscar for it. So there's a lot of sort of barriers now to still break down. I think it's terribly unfair, especially with a lot of the John Williams scores. And it's a hard thing to record some of those scores, and I know that. But the guy that records it doesn't get an Oscar, and I think that's ridiculous. So all the time we're still trying to break down these barriers, So that sort of led on from the getting the credits. But the CD thing was great because Bhaskar Menon said, yeah, sure, Geoff, I'll do it. But what happened when the first CDs came out in those long cardboard sort of packages? On the back of the album, it said, recorded by Geoff Emerick, and there was no credit for George Martin. And then so a whole sort of thing went, But anyway, at least I now get credits on the CDs, hopefully,